So good afternoon, everyone. I hope that you're all well. My name's Daisy. I work for Getting On Board, and I'm here today to introduce this session to you about how trustees can support fundraising of your charity. I was just saying to the panelists before we started that I absolutely love the enthusiasm of charity trustees, the commitment to come to a session at 4:30 on a very sunny day. So you're all very welcome. I've just got a couple of housekeeping bits, and then I'll pass over to Alison, who's going to chair our discussion for us today. So you've just heard the Zoom lady talk to us. This is being recorded and you will get access to the recording afterwards. We'll also hopefully be uploading it onto our YouTube channel where all of our other sessions sit as well. So if you've got any board members where you want to send a polite hint that they think you could do with watching this, then you're able to share it easily on our YouTube channel as well. And just to say that with it being shared onto our YouTube channel, if you ask any questions, I can't imagine this is a particularly contentious subject, but just be mindful of what you're saying with the view that it's going to be uploaded onto YouTube. And so if there's anything that you don't want to be out on the internet, then just be mindful if you're asking any questions around personal stuff. Please could I ask you to stay muted on the call unless Alison or I ask you to unmute. It just makes sure that the call is clear for everyone. I have actually got the power to mute you and I'm not afraid to use it. So that's just really helpful there. Closed captions are available. So that's something that you need to enable on your side. So you should have a bar at the bottom that says closed captions. You click enable and they'll come on for you. All of our sessions are kind of based around England and Wales's regulations, so the Charity Commission in England and Wales. If you're joining us today from Scotland and Northern Ireland, you're absolutely very welcome. I'll pop in the chat the links to your regulators. I think in this session, the principles of what we talk about are UK-wide. I don't think they're particularly regulation-based, but I just wanted to kind of say that out loud, that we acknowledge that there's a difference across the nations. You've got the chat available to use today. Please use that to introduce yourself, share tips, kind of reflect on what the panel are saying. We'd really love to hear from you. If you could make sure that your comments are respectful and useful, that would be really good. Equally, you don't have to use the chat. I know that some people can find it distracting. You'll get access to the chat in the recording afterwards as well. So you can just shut that down and just listen to what our wonderful panel have to say. And then very lastly, this session has been free for you to join today. As are all of our sessions as part of the Trustee Learning Programme. And that's a really big thank you to our sponsors, Rathbones. So they sponsor all of our sessions that have kind of a finance fundraising theme to them. And it allows us to make this session free for us to upload it onto YouTube and for hopefully as many trustees as possible to be involved in these types of conversations. So that's enough from me. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to hand you over to Alison, who's chairing our discussion today. Over to you, Alison.
Thank you, Daisy. Hello, everybody. I'm really glad that you're all here, and I'm delighted to welcome you to today's panel. It's titled How Trustees Can Best Support Fundraising in Their Charities. That's what we're going to be talking about. So I have been, why am I chairing? I've been a director of fundraising and a trustee for many years, so I have experience on both sides of the table. As do many of our panelists today, which is brilliant. I am currently vice chair at the charity and think tank New Economics Foundation, and I was previously vice chair at Mind. I also sit on the Samaritans Finance Committee as their fundraising expert. And as I mentioned, I have done fundraising jobs in a good range of medium and large charities. So people like Asthma UK, Barnardo's, Battersea, Missing People, MenCap, Teenage Cancer Trust. So a bit of a mix. So our lovely panel, they have come from a wide range of background and experience today. So they're going to be able to bring you their unique insights from that experience. And what we're going to do today is we're going to highlight some practical examples. We are going to discuss some of the challenges, and our panel are going to share some of the strategies that they have found effective in fundraising. So I'm going to ask our panel to introduce themselves. I will go in alphabetical order. So I will come to you first. If I've got my alphabet right, I'll come to you first, Jane.
Yeah, I was just trying to work out the alphabet there. Hi everyone. Thanks for being here. I'm really pleased to be part of this panel this evening. I'm really looking forward to it. So yeah, I'm Jane, and I have worked in the charity sector for about 25 years through a mixture of corporate trust, major donor and capital appeal fundraising roles, and as well as director of fundraising and communications. And I'm now a fundraising consultant specialising in high value giving. And I'm also a trustee of Kent, Surrey and Sussex Air Ambulance, where I've been for about 2 years. And I joined there because they were specifically looking for somebody who had philanthropy and high value fundraising experience. And I'm really enjoying the role. So nice to meet everybody. And I'll pass to the next person, which is easy because it's Kerry, and Kay comes after Jane.
Thank you,
Jane. Hi everyone, so I'm Kerry Blackstock. It's great to be here today. This is my first experience with the Getting On Board team, and enjoying it so far. So I have over 20 years of fundraising experience in the mass public fundraising space. So I'm with household name charities like WWF and Dogs Trust, and I'm currently the Senior Director of Marketing and Mass Fundraising at the British Red Cross, and also fundraising trustee at Blue Cross. So again, both sides of the table. Thanks.
and Maddie.
Hi everyone, also my first time working with Getting On Board. I'm really happy to be here. I'm currently Director of Fundraising for an education charity called Future Frontiers, having started and stayed in the charity sector for the last 8 years. I'm a trustee also of Sport for Good charity Boxing Futures. I joined about 2 years ago, coming through the sort of young trustee route, and with a particular fundraising specialism, and I'm also going to be soon joining Impact Ed Consulting, supporting organisations with their fundraising and giving. So yeah, as with the others, bit of a multifaceted experiences that I'm really looking forward to discussing with you all.
Thanks very much, Maddie. So at the end of our chat, we will have the opportunity to take some questions. So pop your questions in the chat, and I'll try and leave sort of 15 minutes at the end for that. There'll also be an opportunity for the panelists to share their professional contact details if they want to, and if you would like to follow up after today's conversation. So what are we hoping for today? Well, I'm hoping that you will leave with more optimism about fundraising, that you'll have renewed vigour in your fundraising, and that you'll also have some insight and examples that you can think about and take back to your boards. So I'd like to start with a very practical subject, and what one of my colleagues called the bare bones of fundraising, what I call the fundraising toolkit. So these are the things that we all need at our fingertips if we are going to ask anybody for money. So let's talk a little bit about that. I'll come first to you, Kerry, and then Maddie, who I think was the person that said bare bones of fundraising. It's stuck in my head. So Kerry first.
Thanks. So I would say the absolute bare bones of fundraising that a trustee needs to be equipped with is the ability to say in a couple of sentences what the charity does and why that person should give it money. And that's a fundamental element of any fundraising activity, regardless of the size of charity or the type of donor. So whether it's mass public fundraising or high value giving or anything in between, you really need to be able to have that door opening conversation and say, have that hook about why they should be interested in your charity. And the sentences don't need to sum up every single thing that the organisation does, but they can focus just on the most compelling area of work, because what you're aiming to do it's that attention grabber, that door opener. And once you've started that conversation, you can then open it up. So as an example, at the Red Cross, we lead on the fact that we are the world's emergency responders. We do masses more stuff than that most people aren't aware of, but we lead on that because we know that it is the biggest and most compelling reason why people support us, and that's any type of supporter. And that sentence doesn't have to be polished. It's better if it doesn't sound like sales patter. Actually, if you bring in your motivations and why you're passionate, it feels much more authentic and compelling. And for example, again, with British Red Cross, I talk about the reason I wanted to work here is because I feel it's the best of humanity, and it's a beacon of hope that there is a better future, and it just makes it feel more real, more genuine, and more likely to get that person sort of wanting to engage further. So that sounds really obvious, but that initial sales pitch that's brief, that you can use whoever you're talking to, and also on things like your social channels. You don't need any budget, you don't need any staff, but that would be where I would start.
Brilliant. Thank you, Kerry. I really echo those sentiments. It's the basic stuff that people often forget. So Maddie, let me come to you. Tell us more about the bare bones of fundraising.
Yeah, I suppose it can depend a bit on the nature of your role in the fundraising too. Are you supporting a fundraising team, or are you actually going out there and fundraising yourselves? And are you also equipping your charity to be in a good place to fundraise? So I think having clarity on the charity's needs. So what is the overall financial picture of the charity as well? What's the shape of it? Where is money coming from? How much do you need? And importantly also, what is it going to go on? Because following from what Kerry said about absolutely that brilliant opening, engaging conversation about the cause, if you're going to then be going on that next step conversation about what actually the money is going to go towards, is having a really clear understanding of what the money is going to fuel as part of the mission. And it doesn't have to be hugely in detail, but I think having some of that information to hand can be really helpful. And I think the other thing that's more of a skill, but is just being able to really use listening skills, so that when you are talking about the charity, that you're also actually listening back. What are they picking up on? What is it about the charity that they are excited by? So that when you're continuing that conversation, you're not just, I suppose, talking from your own perspective, but also reflecting back to them their own love for the cause. Or equally, they might not be interested, and it might be a better use of your time to move on to your next person, which happens and is totally fine. But I'd say those are some of the key things. And if you do have a team too, sort of having alignment on the strategy in terms of, what are our overall goals for fundraising? What are we particularly looking for or not looking for, just to kind of keep a really harmonious dynamic between the board and between the fundraising team.
Lovely, thank you, Maddie. Jane, was there anything that you think people should think about at the very basics of fundraising? What do we need to have front of mind before we begin?
Yeah, I was just following on from what Maddie said actually about knowing what the money will be spent on, is also to have a think about what the impact it has on the people, or you're not necessarily all charities that support people, but on the beneficiaries, whether that's animals, people, whether that's around research. But what difference does that money make that donors bring in? And so it's quite good to have stories and anecdotes. I think as a trustee, is gather some stories from your charity or from your team, so you can talk in a really practical way about the difference that donations make. And my other thought was about being curious, and again it kind of follows up from what Maddie said, but actually be curious about fundraising and the different types of fundraising, particularly if it's not something that you have a background in. And if you do have a team, get to know the team and build relationships with them so you can really understand the different types of fundraising that your organisation does.
Lovely. Is there anything that we've missed out that we haven't talked about that people should be equipped with when they start their fundraising discussions? I've got a couple if you're blank, so don't worry. So I wrote some notes while the guys were talking. So what we're saying is you need a couple of sentences to sum up the charity. You need to know, what is the money going to fuel? What's it going to do? What's it going to pay for? What's the impact going to be? If somebody gives you the money, what is the difference? What is the change? And stories and anecdotes to bring that change to life. That's really important. We need that balance of both the numbers. If you give us £1, what are we going to do with it? If you give us £100, what are we going to do with it? But we need to make these things real. And that's, I think, the most powerful part of this is making it come to life. So assuming that we've done the work and that we have those things, I wonder if I turn to you, Jane, could you give us some examples of positive experiences that you've had with trustees who've supported fundraising really effectively?
Yeah, sure. So I think there are lots of ways that trustees can support fundraising. And I think the thing that scares trustees the most is that they think fundraisers are going to come to them and say, who do you know and who can you go and ask for some money? And that isn't what we're going to do. So I think, think as widely as possible about how you can support fundraising. When I was director of fundraising for a regional homelessness charity, we had a really involved group of trustees. And the types of things that they did was that sometimes they would do events. So we held sleep outs, and sometimes they might take part and they might raise money. But it wasn't always that they were taking part as a participant. They might come and give a talk at the event, or for people that didn't want to stand up and give a talk, just about being at these events and chatting with donors and supporters. At the Air Ambulance, I volunteered at one of their walking events called Heli Hike, and the volunteers really enjoyed having a trustee there that they could talk to as well. So think about how you can get involved and where you feel comfortable. You can also offer, think about what your skills are as a trustee. So you can offer mentoring, or could you hold a workshop? If you're a graphic designer, could you help if there's a design team, can you help upskill some of the staff? At the Air Ambulance, I've done workshops on philanthropy with the philanthropy team. And also think widely about who you know and who you can make connections to. So again, at the Air Ambulance, I'm not there because I've got this black book of wonderful, rich friends. I know lots of major donors because of the work that I've done, but that's on a professional basis. But what I do have is lots of contacts because of the job that I do, working with lots of different charity clients. So I'm able to hook up the team with people that I know. So an example of that is the person who's responsible for impact, monitoring impact and evaluation at the Air Ambulance. I hooked them up with the person from a previous charity I worked for that had that responsibility, so they could have that conversation. I introduced their legacy manager to the legacy manager client that I was working with. So I think those are some really good ways that you can get involved. I think also going back to that curiosity, go to team meetings, maybe shadow, if it's an area of fundraising that you're interested in, shadow that person. At the homelessness charity I work for, we had trustees come out on early morning outreach sessions where we were going out and talking to rough sleepers. So I think there's anything that helps you to understand the crux of what the charity is doing, because as a trustee, you're quite far removed from that sometimes. It all depends how big the charity is, obviously. But anything that really helps you understand the issues that the people you're supporting are facing is really helpful as well. And then there's all sorts of practical things like, do you work somewhere there you can offer a meeting room for a board meeting if the charity doesn't have them? Do you offer venues? And then, of course, there is the thinking about who you do know, who you could make an introduction to, who potentially would support the charity. And we might come on to that in more detail later. So it's a really big part of what you can do, but don't be afraid that fundraisers are going to ask you to just go out and not randomly ask people for money. That isn't how it would work. You would get supported and briefed, and there would be a process. But obviously, people who are really well connected can bring valuable prospects and people who might support their charity on board.
Thanks, Jane. Kerry, I wonder if you have some examples of positive experiences of trustees getting involved or supporting fundraising.
Yeah, and just to sort of echo what Jane was saying, I would say definitely you can't overestimate the impact that having a trustee visiting or taking an interest, actually the boost that brings. So just the presence and engagement does make a really big difference. One example that I've had in my trustee role rather than my fundraising role is where myself and one other trustee sort of formed a little subgroup to work with the fundraising team as they were developing the fundraising plan, because there just isn't enough time to cover things in the trustee meetings in any detail. So we had separate meetings to go through the sort of strategy and approach and act as that critical friend and sounding board, so that then when it went back to the trustees, we were able to sort of show that due diligence and give that confidence, I think, to the other trustees that it had been interrogated and it was a good plan.
Lovely, thank you. So I've captured a number of things there, and actually the main thing seems to be about being present and taking an interest. I think that is absolutely crucial. Just turning up to events and watching your fundraisers, listening to what they say, and helping them feel supported makes such a difference. And in terms of skills and knowledge that you are able potentially to share with your charity, it's not always the big sexy things. Sometimes it can be, do you know a painter and decorator that can come and sort out one of the offices, or the only office, or that can do something very practical. So don't think that you have to have big sort of highfalutin contacts. There's quite often things that can be done that are quite basic. Maddie?
Yeah, just I think on that point, just something else that sprung to me, and it goes back to the bare bones, particularly for certain types of fundraising, but they're important anyway. The charity accounts are such an important document for fundraising. So, even for trustees that are working on the finance side, making sure that those accounts are really clear to be able to read about the charity's finances, but also turn them into a bit of an impact report, really use that achievements and performance and objective section to talk about the work you do and bring it to life and include stories, because that document will often be read before any sort of glossy document or annual impact report. And again, that's a really nice way where someone who's maybe not a fundraising specialist can really play a huge role in making sure that document looks great.
Thank you, Maddie. Now, none of you have to answer this question, but I'm just going to give you the opportunity if you want to, and bear in mind that this is being recorded. Does anyone have an example of something that's been really unhelpful? A trustee doing their best, really wanting to help, but it's just not helped you, the charity, or a fundraising team, if you have one.
I have an example, Alison.
Fire away.
And obviously being completely nameless about which organisation, but certainly I think very well intentioned, but when personal opinion can get in the way. So if fundraising can make some people uncomfortable, sort of see it as the organisation going out with their begging bowl, and don't like that it's particular methods of fundraising are done. And I think in that particular case that I'm thinking of, despite being able to demonstrate the absolute impact of that fundraising activity, it's still a bit of a challenge because this individual's personal preferences are against it. And I think it's really, you have to suspend personal preference and you have to think about what's in the best interest of the organisation. And I think fundraising, it's framing fundraising as giving people the opportunity to make a difference to something that they really care about and something that they're passionate about. It's not this sort of that unpleasant going around with your begging bowl, and so I'd say the main thing is suspending personal opinion. It's not about your own personal opinions, it's about the best thing for the organisation and its beneficiaries.
Well said. I think that's something we all have to remember as trustees, isn't it? Did anybody else want to chip in with an example? Jane, yes.
Yeah, and I think you put that really well, Kerry. And I think another example I've got is about sometimes trustees can really sweat the small stuff, for want of a better expression. And actually, it's about keeping that strategic overview. So really understanding fundraising, but as an example, the amount of times I've been asked, like, why aren't we doing a bucket collection in Sainsbury's? When actually there's nothing wrong with bucket collections in Sainsbury's, and for some charities that works really, really well. But for other charities, they maybe have a fundraising strategy and they've looked at what brings the best return on investment. And they know what they want to prioritise and where they need to put their time and where they need to ask the trustees to help them get the best return on investment. And maybe bucket collections in Sainsbury's aren't the right way to go forward. Similarly, I've had, and it's again really well intentioned, but I've had, I worked on a capital appeal once, and one of the trustees had been reading the Sunday Times Rich List, which can always be a bit of a favourite. And his suggestion was that I wrote to I think it's Lakshmi Mittal, but he was like #1, and he's a huge steel magnate. Because we needed steel for the building, and it was really hard to explain that actually that person had no interest in what we were doing, no connection, no affinity, no relationship with our charity, and that actually me writing to him would be a complete waste of time. And it was really well intentioned, but it was just and why would that person know about how to fundraise for a capital appeal? Because that's not an area that they had any experience in. So we can smile about it and we can laugh, but it was really well intentioned. So I think it goes back to being really well informed about what your charity's needs are, and what they're prioritising in their fundraising.
Maddie, I'll just come to you. Is there anything you would like to share?
No, I was just smiling because every year when those lists get published, I wait. I wait for somebody to recommend writing to everybody on them. But yeah, no, I think the point around alignment too, and if you have a team, sort of building a trusting relationship with them. I think sometimes things can move from potentially a critical friend into actually maybe being very harsh on fundraising teams. They're often dealing in difficult environments. So I think trying to build, not an us and them relationship, but really that sense of we are a team. Fundraising is everybody's responsibility. And actually it takes a lot for an organisation to be able to generate income. It's not all down to how good a fundraiser is. So I think just building that real solidarity with the fundraising team is helpful, and the opposite is unhelpful.
Thank you, Maddie. And I think it's really interesting. Everybody's talked about things being well intentioned, and that is so often the case. Not always, but mostly the case. That people are coming from the right place. They really want to help. And so moving on with that in mind, how do we encourage trustees to have confidence in fundraising? What are the ways we can do that? Maddie, I'll come back to you if that's all right.
Yeah, sure. So I think you know, it can be a bit daunting, the idea of talking about money. But I think what can help is really understanding the purpose of fundraising for your charity and feeling really connected to that, understanding that it's not just going after money for money's sake. This is really about fueling our mission, making sure we can deliver. And I think often having that clarity can really help fundraising going from potentially a bit of a dark art, a bit scary, to being something that becomes vital and more motivating, and goes back to your point about vigor, Alison. So I think clarity on that purpose, and then also I think feeling equipped with, you know, as we spoke about before, that those sentences, how to speak about the charity, but actually it can be really helpful to equip trustees with certain information about that. You know, if the organisation is writing impact reports, writing a case for support, what can you send and share? What stories do you have that the trustees would love to read? So really, I think making sure trustees have access to great content. They will, of course, put their own spin on it, and that's lovely, but I think a starting point. I think opportunities to speak about the charity, getting practice. I think these things, you know, with anything, it starts off a bit more daunting, and then actually once you've had a few conversations, it gets less so. So I think getting opportunities for trustees to, yeah, be part of charity events, speak to people in low pressure scenarios, but just feel like, oh yeah, I can talk really compellingly about my charity. That person really enjoyed talking to me. Oh, I could definitely engage people and talk to them about supporting. So I think it's turning it from something that is on that daunting side to actually being more of a pleasant experience. I mean, lots of people love talking about the causes they care about, what they're giving to. So actually being part of that conversation is a lovely part of the fundraising role, and can be a lovely part of a trustee role as well.
Thank you. How else can we encourage trustees? Jane, Kerry, anything that you would like to add?
I think I was thinking of it from a trustee point of view, because we talk a lot as fundraisers, because that's what we are, aren't we? But I was thinking something I think is really important is empowering, if it is a team, maybe it's the chief executive, maybe you haven't got a fundraising team, but empowering them to tell you what's not going well as much as what is going well. You know, fundraisers, and I'm speaking really generally here, but fundraisers are generally positive people and enthusiastic about what they do because they love what they do. And actually, I think a key thing we need to do as trustees is to say, you know, yeah, show me all those KPIs or those metrics, or tell me all the successes. That's brilliant, and let's share in those. But also empowering them to actually say, this is where we need some help, and this isn't going to plan, and this isn't going as well as we thought it was, because that's what enables you as trustees to really interrogate that area of fundraising and to make informed decisions about how you can support it going forward. And I would say the other thing is to don't be afraid to ask, because I think as trustees, and I know I've done it, there are bits where I sit there thinking, I don't really quite understand this, but I feel like I should understand it. And I feel that everyone else thinks I should know all about this, and actually just have the confidence to put your hand up and say, actually, this isn't an area I know that much about. Can I come and have a chat with you? Can I find out more about individual giving or event fundraising or legacy fundraising or whatever it is you want to find out more about?
And just following up on that, I think as part of trustee inductions, it should be reasonable to get an induction into where the money comes from, so that you'll feel you understand what the current sources of income are, what the types of fundraising that is carried out by the organisation is. And that should be, I think, part of the onboarding programme.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Kerry, because I think that's a really important point. There's something around the confidence, isn't there? How do we, as trustees, have confidence in ourselves to be able to ask people for money. So what are the tools that we need? And we've discussed some of those. But also, if other people are doing the fundraising, how do we have confidence in them? And I think one of the things that I've learned over the years is that, and as Jane alluded to, asking questions. There aren't any stupid questions. You might want to think about where you ask them. Not all questions are appropriate for a board meeting. Some questions are helpful just over a cup of coffee or in a corridor. But I think asking questions is really important, because we've all sat around tables and thought, I don't understand what this is. I hope somebody asks. And so be the person that asks, because you can guarantee that other people will be relieved that you have. And I think that's one of the key ways that we can show that we are engaged as trustees in fundraising activity, but it's also how we learn, and it helps make us better trustees and fundraisers as trustees. So we talked a little bit about confidence. I wondered if we could just move on to some of the fears that trustees can have about asking people for money or asking organisations for money. And also sometimes there's unrealistic expectations, isn't there? We all know that fundraising is hard. So I wonder if, Maddie, perhaps you might like to talk a little bit about fears from a trustee perspective, and how can they be alleviated?
Yeah, sure. So I think a fear might be related to, I suppose, a misconception that fundraising is all about the money, that it's finding people or organisations with wealth and just trying to get our hands on it, and then that's the end of it. And I think one of the ways to sort of address that is by seeing fundraising much more about relationships, about having conversations, and really about not trying to get money out of people who don't want to give to you, because that's not what we're here for, but actually finding the people who would love to give to you, would have a really rewarding experience from that, and effectively being the bridge between your charity and that person, so that it's a really positive experience for everyone. So I think there's that fear about pestering people and it not really being what they want. I think also just the fear of talking about money. I think we're not always very used to it. Some people's jobs they will be, but I think for a lot of us that's not necessarily a space where we feel super comfortable. But I think, again, turning it into, it's not just money for money's sake. We are raising money so that we can deliver our mission, so that we can change our beneficiaries' lives. So actually, I think looking at money a little bit differently can be helpful as well, in terms of what it's for. And yeah, I suppose maybe there's a fear too that it won't work out, that you'll try and get involved and that you've got this network, but maybe they won't actually give anything. That is actually okay. If you hope that your network might have that possibility, but if you introduce somebody and they don't make a gift, that's actually quite normal. And that often many conversations will have to happen before even they might have a conversation with the charity itself, and certainly before a gift. So I think, adjusting those expectations and not being afraid to report back to the board or report back to the fundraising team, oh, I did speak to that person, but I'm afraid it just wasn't quite for them, but I'm going to speak to this other person. But yeah, knowing that it's a bit of a long game and it is not easy.
Jane, would anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think that that fear of, or I suppose no, not a fear, but an unrealistic expectation of how quickly money can come in, and as you say, Maddie, focusing on the money rather than on the relationship, and So I think that that's really important, having some understanding of, particularly if your charity is looking at developing a philanthropy programme, how long it can take from setting up a philanthropy programme and identifying people who might give in a substantial way to actually receiving a gift. Can easily be 18 months, 2 years plus. So, you know, try and have that understanding. I think a fear of trustees is around compliance, actually, and I've seen that in some charity clients that I've worked with, particularly around GDPR and major donor fundraising, particularly when you're profiling someone or gathering research about somebody's interests or somebody's, you know, maybe where they live, trying to think about what capacity they have to give. And you absolutely can do that type of fundraising and be compliant, but I have seen trustees be really fearful of that, and as a result of that, their privacy statement has been so rigid that it doesn't meet the business needs of the fundraising team. And I think that's a real risk, and it's a real shame, because actually if trustees fully understood how fundraising works, they'd fully understand that you can be absolutely compliant but also meet the needs of the business needs of your fundraising department.
Kerry, did you want to add anything?
The only other fear I can think of is that the trustee might put their neck on the line, you know, introduce one of their contacts to the charity, and then the charity fumbles it and delivers a really disappointing experience, and the trustee feels that reflects very badly on them. In terms of solutions for that, though, it's not my area of fundraising, so but I do know that is a fear, that we need to make sure that you've got reassurances in place that, you know, if you do that and you do that introduction, what's going to happen, what the expectations are, and making sure they're realistic, like Maddie and Jane have said.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just thinking of anecdotes, but I'm not sure we have time. Maybe another time I'll share some of the terrible stories I have. So what makes trustees good fundraisers and less good fundraisers? And particularly, I think we know that people are often trying really hard and feeling the fear and doing it anyway. So what makes an effective trustee fundraiser or an ineffective trustee fundraiser? Who'd like to pitch in on that one?
I'm happy to start. I think it's it's a lot of the things that we've already talked about, you know, feeling equipped that you can have that informed conversation about the needs of the charity, the impact the money will achieve, and then understanding the fundraising programme, where the money comes from, and being open-minded and supportive of that, you know, being that critical friend, but understanding that fundraising, you know, if you've got a fundraiser team, if you're lucky enough to have a fundraising team, they will have expertise, and do listen to it and don't override it with personal views and personal opinions.
Yeah, I would back that up. If you're going out and you're meeting people, let the fundraising team, if you have one, or the chief exec if you have one, or whoever is employed by the charity, brief you, and be open to that, and so that you're really prepared. You know, practice as well, that the more you talk to donors, the more you're going to enjoy it and the more you're going to relax. But number one for me is brushing up those listening skills. I think that's really important as trustees. For all of us, actually, it's not just trustees, is it? For everybody, you know, if you're having a conversation with a potential donor or with someone that's supporting you, really listen and be really curious, have a genuine interest, because that just shines through. If it's inauthentic, people pick that up really early. But actually, if you're really interested in what that person's got to say, and you remember, you've probably got that shared interest, particularly if they're already a donor, because they love the cause and you love the cause, that's why you're a trustee. So build on that and really listen to what they're saying and be really curious about them. And I think that goes a long way.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, try and find that comfortable space where you can be authentic, like listen and feel that, you know, you can have that conversation and find a space to be yourself and have a real two-way dialogue. I think also, you know, being quite focused on what you really need. I think a challenge can be sometimes there's a funding opportunity that maybe isn't quite a fit, and there can be a risk of wanting to just chase that funding, potentially doing a bit of shoehorning to try and get there. And I think, you know, being really aligned with the wider trustees and the team on what opportunities are suitable, and actually where it might not be the best opportunity to pursue for your specific needs. So I think that focus on what the charity really wants to commit to doing well.
Thank you all. So we touched on this earlier, and I think it is something that people really worry about when they become trustees or they join a board, and whenever anybody says anything about fundraising, is that people can get a bit scared. What are the ways in which trustees can leverage professional networks or personal contacts? What are the things that work, and what are the things that don't work? Jane, you touched on this earlier.
Yeah, sure. So I think be open to talking to if you have we keep saying this, so if you have a fundraising team, but be open to a conversation about it's simply exploring the networks and the groups that you're part of. So you know, sit down with them, and I don't know, maybe I do it with a pen and a massive, you know, marker pens and a big flip chart sheet, and just talk to trustees, well, as a trustee, talk to your fundraisers about the different networks and groups that you're part of. And this isn't so that you're immediately going to be asked to go and ask them for money, but it is about thinking, actually, who do I know? You know, where did I go to school? What other boards do I sit on? What groups do I belong to? Am I, maybe you're part of the WI or a Rotary Club? Are you part of a church or a faith group? What are your hobbies? And often trustees sit on a number of different boards. They're not often people that just sit on one board. Often they are people that sit within all these different networks or communities. Or maybe you're a deputy lieutenant. And it's just about exploring those. It's like, actually, who do I know within there? Who do I know who I think is actually going to love this charity as much as I love it? And could I make an introduction, and what's the best way of making that introduction, and what do I need from the fundraiser or the charity to make me feel comfortable with making that introduction? And so it goes back to what Maddie was saying about building relationships. You know, you're not going to jump straight in and say, oh, by the way, I'm a trustee for so-and-so, can you give us £5,000 or whatever? But it is about saying, actually, I'm part of this amazing charity. They do great work. This is a bit about what we do. Can I invite you along to find out a bit more? So it's brilliant when trustees bring people along on project visits, for example, and host a project visit, and you wouldn't be left on your own. You'd be with the chief exec or with a fundraiser or with a member of the team. And then gradually, as that relationship develops, you build your confidence as a trustee because you see a relationship developing, you see an interest developing. And with support and with training at the right time, maybe you are involved in asking them or giving that opportunity, as Kerry said earlier, giving that opportunity to make a difference. But certainly that isn't something that happens right at the beginning. So that's how I think it works best. The other way it can work is that fundraisers or the team come to you with a list of names, and you indicate who you might know and how well you might know them and whether you'd be interested in making an introduction. And that can work as well, but it's much, much better if you sit down on an individual basis, not in a group basis. Don't do it at a board meeting. Sit down with someone on an individual basis and just plot out people that you know.
Lovely. Thanks, Jane. Daisy, do we have any questions? I'm conscious of time.
We do. I've had someone message. So they are kind of leading a very small charity, and I think this is getting on board. We get a huge range of people who are kind of in very large charities down to charities where they're tiny, and the trustees are doing all the day-to-day work. So this is kind of at that end of the scale. So the question is basically that they feel they've got a really strong USP, and they can really articulate the kind of the whys and the impacts and all of the stuff that we've spoken about, but they're finding that filling out applications is very time consuming, and then they just don't know where to find people. So they're kind of confident that when they get to there that they can articulate the why and kind of make that pitch, but that initial work, acknowledging that it's a long game. So what's the smart way? What's the strategy? What's the first step for this person to take in terms of getting that first bit of money in to get the long game going, if that makes sense.
Who would like to speak to that question? Maddie?
Yeah, I think a really helpful way that we found in fundraising team has been looking at organisations that have a similarity to yours, and then looking at their website and at their accounts to see who is supporting them, because then you're able to find supporters that have an interest in that sort of area of work. So that can be a good way of finding particularly like trusts and foundations that may be possible to approach. There's also some really helpful newsletters that you can sign up to. There's ones that come through Charity Excellence Framework and from Get Grants. So there's some places where you can sort of consistently have some news coming through to you as well. But I would say finding those areas, those causes that naturally have some sort of connection to yours is a helpful place to start for quite efficiently finding a few that you can approach.
Thanks, Maddie. Any more questions, Daisy?
I've got a question, which is but also if people kind of want to start typing or want to put your hand up as well to ask a question, that's fine. Just wanted to say we've had a comment in response to the conversation around personal networks to say that their board's created a subcommittee and have outside ambassadors that advise on how you can leverage personal networks and corporate relationships. It's worked really well so far. And my question was kind of around that, really. So a lot of what we're championing at getting on board is that diversifying of people on boards. And I think the Little Black Book speaks to the kind of the traditional trustee. And a lot of what we're trying to champion is different people being on board. And so when on my board, I'm half the age of everyone else on there, and much less than half of the wealth of them on there as well. And so I always find it quite personally kind of ostracizing, really, that around those conversations I had my monthly direct debit and my commitment to fundraising was there, and that was appreciated. But I guess my question is, how do you do that personal network way in a way that doesn't alienate those on the board who just naturally haven't been in those positions to have those networks, whether that's by age, background, ethnicity, all of those sorts of things that we're trying to tackle. And I know, Jane, I'm not suggesting that you haven't said that, but I guess kind of just saying it out loud, really, and acknowledging that that's the bit of the elephant in the room.
Yeah, sure. And I think that's a really good point. Thanks for raising that, Daisy. I think you're absolutely right. And not everybody has, big networks and loads of different groups and boards that they sit on. Not everybody who's a trustee has that, obviously. I don't, for a start. But I think that we are all part of different communities, whatever that community might be. And it doesn't have to be people who are fabulously wealthy at all, because there's lots of different ways of fundraising, aren't there? So maybe you know people that are really active on social media that could help with campaigning. Maybe you know people who are they're employees for a big company and they have a charity of the year. So it isn't all about kind of sitting there and thinking, actually, who do I know who's got loads of money and I can go and ask for money? It's actually just thinking really widely about who are the connections. Maybe you're part of a music group or singing group or any of those things, you know, and maybe they support a charity each year. So it's just about thinking as widely as possible. And I think also the other thing to say is it's absolutely okay for not all your trustees to sit down and do network mapping. So have a think about the trustees that you could approach that you think may be willing and may be able to do that. But there should never be any pressure for trustees to do that if it's not something that they feel comfortable with. And I think that's really important as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I would second that. And as we move away from the era of the great and the good sitting on boards, and in order to have much more diversity around the table, then I think we all, as board members, need to think about how we approach these questions differently. Any more questions, Daisy?
Yes, I do have another one, and I'm just scrolling to find it. So someone has asked about any advice for small charities who currently get most of the income from one specific area, e.g. grants and trusts. So how to encourage diversification when time and resource is so limited and we need the money now to replace unsuccessful grants. So this charity has one fundraiser dedicated to grants and another who does everything else. So yeah, how to diversify income, essentially, which is a grand question for 4 minutes left. If anyone's got the solution to that, I think we'll all take it.
Should we do another session on that? Maddie, anything you would like to add on that question?
On this huge question.
Yes, just if you could in 60 seconds.
Yes. I think thinking carefully about, so having multiple fundraising streams can obviously be really good, but they all take slightly different skills, they all take different capacity, they all play to different strengths of a charity. So I would say be really careful about which extra one maybe you take on. Think about, you know, do you have a volunteering opportunity that could be great for corporates? Do you have subscribers to a newsletter that could be great for exploring some of the individual giving side? But I think just being quite mindful that unfortunately, I would say it's quite difficult to get a quick win with a new income stream. And actually, if you're having financial challenges, often existing supporters or contacts can be a safer place to seek funding in a short period of time. Really does take time to get new income streams up and running.
Lovely, thank you. And of course, there are many excellent courses run by Getting on Board that can help you look at these things. We're almost out of time now, but just quickly before we finish, if any of you would like to be reached outside of this conversation today, how can people get in touch with you?
LinkedIn, I was going to say, I'm very easy to find on LinkedIn.
Thank you.
Same, I'm on there as Maddie Gazzard because I've changed my name, but yeah, I'll put my LinkedIn in the chat and then anybody can find it.
Brilliant. And Jane?
Yeah, the same. I use LinkedIn, and so yeah, if you're interested, let me know.
Brilliant. Lovely. Thank you so much, guys. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you. I'm sure we could talk for a lot longer. I feel like we should all be able to go to the pub now, but unfortunately not. Daisy, shall I hand back to you?
Yes, please. Thank you so much. I can also just see a really lovely conversation between people who are talking about how to make most of external ambassadors. So if you want to take time to read that, I won't close the call immediately if people want to have a read through the chat as well. But thank you so much. Thank you, Alison, Kerry, Maddie and Jane. What a brilliant conversation. These hours just always fly by, and I hope that people on the call have enjoyed it as much as I have. I've just popped some links into the chat. So like I said earlier, this session is one of many in our Trustee Learning Programme. We don't just talk about fundraising. We've got lots of stuff on finances, on wider governance issues and around trustee recruitment and that question of how do we diversify. So wherever you are in your trustee journey, I'm absolutely adamant that there's a session that's of interest to you. So one of the links takes you through to the page where you booked onto this session and you can have a nosy at what's coming up. We have an evaluation form. So our Trustee Learning Programme has been built from previous recommendations of people who filled in that evaluation form or said to us, I really want to know how I can support my charity better through fundraising, and this is how this session is born. So if there's anything on your mind that you think you'd really like to have a conversation about, please let us know. And our website's got loads more resources on there as well. So we really don't want you to feel like you're alone. There's lots of us who are navigating this, and sometimes it can feel like a bit of a lonely role. But we hope that we're bringing together people to have these conversations, and you're leaving thinking, yeah, actually, they are some of the things that I think about, and I'm glad to have had the chance to engage in that conversation as well. So please keep in touch. We hope to see you at a future event. And with that, I am actually thinking about going to the pub, Alison. So I think we should call it a day there.
I raise a virtual glass to you.
Indeed.
Thank you very much, everybody.
But yeah, I'll leave it there. Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Good